We read in this week's portion, Toldos, about Yitzhak marrying Rivka, who was the matriarch at the age of 40. And initially, she was barren. And she became pregnant. Yitzhak was nearly 60 years old, because Yaakov and Esav, who were twins, were born when Yitzhak was 60 years old. They were married for 20 years before they were born. And the Torah goes out of its way to tell us that Rivka was barren. It was impossible for her to have a child. It's something unusual. We find that all the matriarchs were barren. Sarah was barren. Rivka was barren. We know Rachel Imenu was barren. Leah initially was barren, and Hashem opened her womb to endear her to Yaakov. But initially she was barren. All the matriarchs were barren. But the Torah never makes an overt statement saying she was barren, because we find there was a special level of supplication that Yitzhak had taken initiative to allow this miracle to take place. As the Torah says in a moment, Vayetar Yitzhak l'nochach ishto. L'nochach ishto ki akorehi. It uses an unusual word. Doesn't say vayispalel. Tefillah vayispalel, he prayed. What's vayetar? It was the most forceful level of prayer to be able to bring about this miracle. And that says, why did he need this most impactful prayer? Ki akori, because she was barren. By Sarah, the Torah doesn't say she was barren. She was. They were married for so many years, she didn't have a child. By the others, but they were. I mean, her level, the Torah is making a statement. It was impossible to have a child unless God intervened and performed the miracle. Why here and not there? So first, let's talk about why the matriarchs were barren. So the Midrash tells us, you have a person who's needy, and he's a unseemly character, seedy type person, and he comes to your house or comes to your office, something, for a handout. So you say to him, you don't want to see him, because every time you see him, he touches in a way where he leaves not a good taste, not a good feeling. So you say the person comes for help, you say, something, next time you come, there's no reason for you to come every day or once a week or every other day. I'll give you enough money. You don't have to come back for 5 years. So the intent of the benefactor is not because he wants help so generously, because he doesn't want to see the person. I don't want you knocking on my door every day. I don't want to look at you. So here's this large amount of money, disappear. But tzaddikim, the devoutly righteous, HaKadosh Baruch Hu mis'aveh l'tfilosan shel tzaddikim. God desires the supplication of tzaddikim. He wants to hear them. He wants them knocking on his door. I'm looking forward. So if they wouldn't be needy, first, they don't pray with the same level of intensity, and they have no need to continuously, they feel they don't want to burden God. So God says, no, I want you to come. It's not a burden. That's my pleasure when you come, when I see people like you, who you are my glory in existence. Therefore, God denies them the ability to have children naturally, so they should pray and overturn the natural order to bring about the miracle. So they have to knock and pound on God's door. That's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's why the matriarchs were all barren. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu mis'aveh l'tfilosan shel tzaddikim. God desires the supplications of the tzaddikim. He waits for it. Now, we find in the desert, humanly it was impossible to survive. And the reason why the Torah identifies all the locations the stop-offs, we traveled in the desert to appreciate that if not for God's mercy, we couldn't have survived. Because he'd say, they traveled desert, but they were on the periphery of the desert. So they were able to buy provisions as they traveled. No, we were in the middle of the desert. Humanly, it was impossible to survive. So how did we survive? Because God provided the manna. Every day, the exact amount that was needed for each individual fell in the desert. As much as you would collect, as little as you would collect, when you would evaluate what you had, it was always enough to sustain them for 40 years. Every Friday, a double portion. Because Shabbos, they weren't able to go out. And that's the basis why we have Lechem Mishnah. We have the 2 loaves of bread at every meal to commemorate the double portion that we received Friday for Shabbos. Okay? The wellspring of Miriam. Could you imagine how much water gushed from that wellspring? We had millions of people had needed water. God provides, not a problem. Why did the month fall every day? God says every day you go out, gather in the month. God could give us a weekly stipend, a monthly stipend, a yearly stipend. Every day we should go out. We could sit and study Torah. It took some amount of time to go out to bring in the month. Why did God? Anyway, we lived a miraculous level. He should have given us a month's supply of month. No, every day, day in and day out, you go out in the morning and you bring in the month. So you could say something similar. Why? Because God wants us to go out to understand every day I will provide for you. Now, there's a question which is asked. We find that God cursed the snake, the ancient serpent, because it was due to him. Chava initially ate of the tree of knowledge, and she gave of that fruit to her husband. He took down existence. And Adam failed because of the snake. God says, because of what you did, he took its feet. Originally it walked, was upright. You will slither on your belly, and the earth shall be your fare. That's your fodder. So the question they ask is, it's a blessing, it's not a curse. Every species has to be in its own habitat to be able to survive. Because if the food is not in its own habitat, it can't live. The snake, earth is that's its fare, that's its fodder. There's nowhere in existence where there's no earth. So the snake is guaranteed survival wherever it goes. So the cursing is a blessing. But no, that was the ultimate curse. So, and they asked this question. The answer they give is this, that the Talmud tells us, speaks about God's daily schedule. What does God do every day? Of course, he does a lot of other things. But it speaks about this particular schedule. The first 3 days of 3 hours a day, God studies Torah when at his level. The second 3 hours a day, he judges the world. The third 3 hours a day, he sustains all existence from the greatest creature to the microscopic creature. Every day, whatever their needs are, he wills that those needs, physical needs. The fourth 3 hours a day, he studies with the souls of children who passed away young. He studies with Tinok Shabes Rabbon, children who passed away before Bar Mitzvah. He studies with their souls. That's a schedule. So now, when God sustains the world, nourishment-wise, provision-wise, feeding-wise, that means every species he takes into account. He thinks about every one of them. What is the aim is the largest creature, what its needs are. The smallest insect, the microscopic insect, what's its needs? Every species he focuses on and provides. There's one species he doesn't have to think about. You know what that is? That's the snake. God despises that serpent to such a degree God says, I don't even want to think about you. Earth will be your fare. Wherever you go, I don't have to provide sustenance for you because the world itself is earth. So that's the greatest curse. The greatest curse is you may be guaranteed survival, but if you're cut off from God, you don't even enter God's within his thought process. That itself is the worst curse. That's the curse. God every day provides for the Jews in the desert the daily needs measure of manna every single day. You know what that means? He could give you a weekly stipend, a monthly stipend. I don't have to think about what I have to give you till next month. You know, you pay your mortgage. You have to think about it once a month. You know, that day, make sure you have enough money to pay the mortgage. You don't have to think about it every day. Just make sure the check's in the mail, that it arrives. Otherwise, you're going to pay a penalty. So God, why does he have to be busy with us every day? That only reflects the nature of the relationship. God wants every day to provide the amount of manna for every Jew, adult, male, female, infant, whatever the need is, it will be there. That's a demonstration of his love, of his concern, of his attachment, of his relationship with us. Okay? But there's another thing. Where do we, everybody in life, to be able to have a sense of reality, everything is experience. And now a person, in terms of who's well-weathered, is based on his experiences in life. You know, the chinuch writes that an elderly person, you're supposed to acknowledge him and give him his due respect. Why? Even he's not a Torah scholar. An elderly person, why? Because the lessons of life are wisdom. Person lives a long life. He's drawn from lessons of life, and today he has what we call sage wisdom, or a semblance of that. Therefore, he should be acknowledged for that, sage wisdom. That's what it's about. You know what it means to be in the desert, the wilderness, impossible to survive? Unless every single day that manna falls. It's a conditioning process in having trust in God. Every year, day in, day out, for 40 years, the manna falls. Every Erev Shabbos, Friday, double portion. What does that say? It's a conditioning process, God is credible. We could rely on God. God is the provider. We don't have to worry about these things. He's proven himself to us. People ask me a question. What about the Holocaust? Why did God bring about the Holocaust? And Holocaust survivors asked this. Today, there aren't many left. You know what the answer is? There is no answer. Only God knows the answer. But I always say to them, but if there is a question, there is no answer. But if you have trust in God, you have no question. Now, why should you have trust in God? God has a track record with us. Throughout the millennia, we've had upheavals, we have pogroms, we had destructions, we had holocausts, we had crusades, went through things which bordered on that. And we came out on top. And somehow we recovered. All our enemies went into the dustbins of history. God has a track record with us. If you read that and you reflect on it, and you're able to internalize that, we don't have the answer. But the question doesn't bother us because we have a trust, because God has a track record. The desert experience was a mentoring to God should establish a credibility with us, despite the fact that humanly it was impossible to survive. He would not let us down. We survived it. That's what it's about. So it's not only because God wants to think about us every day, but simultaneously is also mentoring us for then forever, that God is credible and reliable, and we have to have faith in him as he proved himself. That's the understanding. So the matriarchs, why were they barren? There, one reason. God desires the supplications of the tzaddik. God says, I want you knocking on my door. I want to see you. So I give you the need to pray. Now, But I asked, it's true by all the matriarchs, but here the Torah goes out of its way and makes a statement. Why is Yitzchak praying the most forceful, impactful type of supplication? Ki akorehi, because she's barren. So here the Or Chaim says something phenomenal. We read last week that Eliezer went and he negotiated the hand of Rivka on behalf of his master. His master was Yitzchak, ultimately. Now, before she left, Lavan, the brother of Rivka, and the mother tried to interfere and delay it. So they said, let us ask, what does the maiden want? Does she want to go or not? She says, I'm going. I want to go. Rashi cites the Midrash, even if against your will, I'm leaving. She's leaving. Before she leaves, they give her a blessing. Lavan and the mother give her a blessing. You should be into the 10,000s. You should procreate and proliferate in great numbers into the tens of thousands, and you should conquer the gates of your enemies. That's the blessing they gave her. Okay, Rivka now becomes the matriarch of the Jewish people. And now she has Yaakov. Could you imagine? People are going to say, Yaakov is Yaakov. You know why? We attribute it to the blessing that Lavan gave. You understand? It's bad news. We're going to attribute Yaakov's addressing the objective of creation, fathering the 12 tribes who are the Shiftei Kah, who ultimately were able to evolve into a nation who were qualified to accept the Torah at Sinai. Lavan has a hand in this. Could you imagine? It's his blessing that brought this all about. God says, under no circumstance. Rivka is barren. Humanly, it's impossible for her to have a child, to conceive. Could you imagine Lavan giving a blessing to a stone? You should multiply into the endless numbers. Some Lavan wake up and die right. It's not happening. The stone can't conceive. There's no life in the stone. If Rivka can't have a child, she's barren. So how does she have a child? You know why? God performed a miracle. So from where does the Jewish people, where do they emanate from? From God's miracle, not from Lavan's blessing. Therefore, the Torah goes out of its way. Who is Rivka? There should be no question. It's impossible for her to conceive a child. Why is she having a child? Because Yitzchak, her husband, prayed with this forceful expression of prayer. Therefore, he activated the miracle, and she merited to be able to conceive. Now, she becomes pregnant. She's having pain and agitation in her womb that she thinks, as Rashi says, she thinks she's going to die. To that degree, others say, something's going to happen. The child will not survive this pregnancy with all this agitation. So she needs a reading. What's going on? So she goes to seek out God. So who does she go seek out? Shem. Shem, the son of Noach, was a prophet. And he tells her what it's all about. You have two entities, two nations, two kingdoms in your womb. One represents good, one represents evil. They're warring. They cannot coexist. And when they leave your womb, they will leave as two realities of good and evil opposed to one another. That's what they tell her. That's what he tells her. People, they speak about, every day we say Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov. God, when he identifies himself, I am the God of Yitzchak. You understand? Yitzchak must have been something special. If God, could you imagine? Person says, he works for a king. He's an ambassador. I am the ambassador to so-and-so. He doesn't even have to say his name. That you associate yourself with the ultimate, that tells you who you are, regardless of who you are as a person. So if God says, I am the God of Yitzchak. If God is priding himself and saying, Yitzchak, I am his God, Yitzchak really must be special. Otherwise, God's not going to identify himself. I am Elokei Yitzchak, the God of Yitzchak. And Yitzchak was the location of God's presence in this world, like the Holy of Holies. Yitzchak really must have been special. But yet, if you read the narrative, it's unbelievable. His wife has a piece of information she never shares with him. Never. She knew the reality of Esav, who he was. She never shared it with her husband. What's proof he never shared it? Because when it came to the blessing, the birthright, Yitzchak wanted to give it to Esav. If he would have known the reality of who Esav is, that he personifies evil, he would have never even considered giving it. And all the strife between Yaakov and Esav is because Esav feels he was duped, that Yaakov stole the birthright. If she would have informed him in advance, it would have never ever come to that. And Reb Shimon Yochai says, Halochehi, it's been ordained that Sinai reality, like it's etched in stone, Esav Sonei Yaakov. Esav hates with a passion, with a vengeance, Yaakov. Amalek is the grandson of Esav. God says, my throne cannot be complete if Amalek exists in existence. You know, this could have been avoided. If Shisha would have shared with Yitzchak this reality, all this would have never happened. Evidently, I'll tell you what, they speak from the modern pulpits. You realize there was an age difference. He was 60, she was 23. You know, maybe it wasn't there was the greatest communication between them. You know, in those days, they didn't have, marriage counselors, or they didn't have therapists. Maybe the people who pose these questions, they need therapists. You know, if they'd be able to read, or they need a good reading teacher to explain what the text says. It's like the person who has a PhD and he's a poet laureate and he works for a law firm and he's going to write the legal document. They say, no, that's good for prose. That's good for literature, not for writing a legal document at a law firm, especially when you charge $1,000 an hour to write that document. You don't qualify. So the question is, why did she share it with Yitzchak? Why didn't she? Now, there's a more basic question. She went to seek out some understanding from Shem. Avram was a prophet. Why did she go to Avram? Avram, I'm having a problem. Could you please tell me what the problem is? You're a prophet. Yitzchak's husband was a prophet. Seek it out from him. Yitzchak, what's going on? You know what the answer is? She went to Avram. What does a prophet know? A prophet only knows what God tells him. She goes to Avram. Avram, my holy father-in-law, what's going on? I prayed, a miracle happened. I don't know what's going on. What's going on? He says, I have no reading. God is not telling me. So evidently, if God's not telling me, I'm not supposed to know. I don't know. She goes to Yitzchak, and she poses the same question. What's going on? He says, I don't know. Because if God would tell me, I would know, but I don't know. So she goes to Shem. Shem gives her the reading because God reveals it to him. So what does that say? Why did God reveal to Shem and not to Avram and Yitzchak? You know what the answer is? Because Avram is not supposed to know, which we'll discuss in a moment, and Yitzchak is not supposed to know. So now that she has the reading through Shem, she's not permitted to divulge this information. She's not permitted to divulge it to Yitzchak or to anybody. Okay? Now, why? Now, Avram was meant to live 180 years. God took 5 years off his life. Why? Because God had promised him that when he passes away, he will pass away in a good old age. Yishmael was an evil man originally. Before Avram passed away, he did tshuva. Why did he do tshuva? Because if he wouldn't have repented, Avram would have died not in that such great old age, leaving over such a son who was evil. So Yishmael did tshuva before Avram passed away. So the promise of Seva Tova, good old age, should be fulfilled. If Avram would have been aware of the nature of his grandson, Esav, it would have undermined that blessing to the nth degree. God says it has to be kept from him. To the point, he's passing away 5 years before his time. She should never be aware what kind of grandson he's going to be, because he was 13 years old already when he passed away, or 15. And he has to be kept in the dark. Because if he's aware of it, it would actually destroy him. And therefore would be contrary to my blessing. Okay? So Avram couldn't know. What about Yitzchak? The whole struggle with good and evil, what really ignited that, the birthright. Yaakov bought the birthright, as we will discuss. And then what happens? It comes time for the blessing. And Yitzchak was unaware that Yaakov had purchased the birthright. And Yitzchak wants to give the blessing to Esav. If he would have given that blessing to Esav, it would have been disastrous. That means all the material, the purse strings belong to Esav. He would have strangled us. He would have destroyed us. Therefore, there's no way that the blessings, which were material blessings, could go to Esav. It has to go to Yaakov. His mother summons him, Rivka, because she's aware of this, because God revealed to her that Esav's about to get the birthright. Immediately, she prepares the delicacies. Yaakov snatches what's rightfully his, right from under Esav's nose. Esav finds out about this. The word livid is an understatement. He's incensed, and he says, I will kill my brother. And he vowed to kill him. He was advised by his mother, flee. Flee for your life. So, of course, she couldn't share this with her husband, that he was vows to kill him because she was aware of it. He says, Esav's wives, they're causing us angst, aggravation, because they're idolaters, pagans. He has to go to Haran, to my brother, to marry one of his daughters. So Yitzchak believed the reason why Yaakov was going to Haran was to find a wife. Not that he was fleeing from Esav. He had no idea. But Rivka knew the truth, but she couldn't share it. She couldn't share it. So what precipitated this angst and this stress and struggle and hate between the two parties? Because Yitzchak wasn't aware of the true nature of Esav. But that's God's plan till the end of time. The balance of good and evil. Yaakov and Esav. The Jewish people, nations of the world. The counterbalance to Yaakov is Esav. And Yaakov is the counterbalance to Esav, as we'll discuss. Therefore, he had to be kept in the dark. And he never ever knew the true nature of Esav for that reason. Okay? But you see, Yitzchak was no slouch. Even though he wasn't informed by God, or he wasn't told by Rivka, but it says he was able to deceive his father. He had such guile. He was such a conniver and charlatan, he was able to pull the wool over his father's eyes. Yitzchak had a dimension of greatness. Why couldn't he see through all this? The charade. He was able to deceive him, and he did deceive him. Although he knew Esav was not Yaakov. Esav was a hunter. Yaakov was Ish Yaakov Tam Yoshev V'Holim. He was a man of the tent of Torah. Every moment of his life was fully invested in Torah. He knew he wasn't that, but he didn't know he was evil. But how could he not know he was evil? He raped women. He killed. He plundered. He did terrible things. But somehow, when he presented himself to his father, and whatever was said out there, somehow never came to the ears of Yitzchak. He was able to create such a persona. He thought, this man, he's God's gift to humanity. That's what Yitzchak believed. But that was the guile of Yitzchak, of Esav. And it says in the Midrash that if Rivka herself, who came from that background, her brother was no slouch compared to Esav, Lavan. But nevertheless, Lavan paled to the guile and the connivingness of Esav. To the point where Esav was such a deceiver, charlatan, that when Yaakov was confronted with him, after not seeing him for 36 years, and it says he prepared for three things for that encounter: prayer, a gift, and battle. The tefillah the supplication was, Hatzileni no miyad ochim yad Esav. Save me from my brother Esav, because even though I know he's my brother, and I know he's Esav, but he has that ability to disarm a person, to make the person feel that he's his most intimate friend. Even Yaakov knew he was. He felt that he could disarm him, and at that moment of vulnerability, he would kill him. Could you understand what this is? Nobody knew better who he was other than Yaakov. Yet he was concerned that somehow he'll strip him of this awareness, and that's when he'll kill him. He'll let his guard down, he'll kill him. So he prayed for special protection, that he should never be in any way weakened, and he should always be at his cognizant of what this man was. That was Esav. Esav is what? Is guile at the most extreme level that we can't even relate to. Now, we know, it's known, Amalek numerically is Sofek. Sofek means question. He's able to create always distortions. That Amalek is the distorter. The sea was split. The sea closed on the Egyptian armies. The world stood in trepidation. They trembled from the Jewish people. This nomad band of people known as Amalek, they attacked us. What did they do? So the Midrash tells us it's equivalent of what? Of a person jumping into a scalding bath, getting burnt, but he cools the bath down for everybody else. Everybody's afraid to approach that bath because they're going to get burnt. This person goes, jumps into the bath, cools the bath down for everyone else. You don't have to be concerned. There's no reason to tremble. They're no different than we are. God says, because of what Amalek had done, they attacked you after the splitting of the sea. There's a positive commandment to annihilate them, obliterate them from under the heavens. My throne is not complete as long as they exist. What do they represent? They represent distortion. They are Esav at the most pronounced level. Guile, distortion, charlatans. White is black, black is white. That's what they are. There's nothing they can't convince you that is, which is not. That's what Esav is. Amalek is the expression of that. The Amalekites. As we say, it's not the farthest thing from the truth. It's the antithesis of truth. That's what Amalek is. Why is Yaakov? Yaakov is the counterbalance to Esav. You know, Samach Mem, we don't even say the name of Satan. Satan in the most lethal form is called Samach Mem. We don't pronounce the name because just by pronouncing the name, it empowers Satan. Now we read in the Torah, the service of Yom Kippur. What happened on the service of Yom Kippur? There were two goats which looked identical, and the high priest had to draw lots. Which goat is Lashem, which will be sacrificed in the Mishkan or in the temple, and which goat will be taken out to the desert and thrown down a mountainside, and it's dismembered. And the goat that was sent out to the desert carried on all the sins of the Jewish people. That's what it carried on it. And therefore, the person who was chosen to carry it out to the desert, he became contaminated. From the impurity of what it carried, he became contaminated from this. And that atoned for all the sins of the Jewish people. So the Nachmanides writes, what exactly was the nature of this goat? Was it a sacrifice? He says it can't be a sacrifice. Because bringing a sacrifice to an angel is idolatry. Serving a deity, that's idolatry. So why is God saying you should take one of those goats into the desert and throw it down a mountainside? So he explains Satan is a fierce prosecutor. What is Yom Kippur? Yom Kippur is the most merciful day of the year. If Satan in any way interferes, he disrupts the attribute of mercy. So God says, you know something? He says, what is it analogous to? The king makes a banquet. And he has the kitchen crew who prepared. You know something? You have to give him some of that food. Otherwise, you know what they're going to do? They're going to disrupt the banquet. So what do? You take the food, plant it about 20 miles from the banquet hall, and say, you people, you have the food there. Take care. You can eat all you want there. Because the king's intention was, I don't want you around the banquet hall because you can disrupt the festivities. So he says, what is the location of all the nether forces? The desert. The desert is why? Because the desert, a human being can't survive in a desert. Can't live in a desert. So therefore, that's Samach Mem's location. His bastion of location is there. All the nether forces are there. Sending this goat is really, it's like throwing a few crumbs to satisfy Satan. You're acknowledging him. It's not a sacrifice. And as a result of this, he's not going to disrupt the day of mercy to bring about any level of prosecution. That's the idea. Now, what's the difference between a goat and a sheep? It's a different species. The fleece of a sheep is called wool. The fleece, the hair of a goat is called goat's hair. Esav was what? When they came out, they were born. What was the obvious difference between Yaakov and Esav? Esav is Ish So'ir. He was a hairy man. Yaakov was Ish Chalak. He was smooth-skinned. What's hair? The goat. The goat represents Esav. Esav is a reincarnation of Samach Mem. He is the antithesis to destroy anything that represents holiness. Just as Samach Mem was created to undermine holiness in existence, that's why God created him. A manifestation, a reincarnation of that's Edom. That's Esav. That's what he's Ish So'ir. He's a hairy man. The goat is hairy. It's not called wool. It's not called fleece. It's called hair. What's the location of the Samach Mem? The desert. You send that goat out to the desert. That's to distract him that he shouldn't disrupt the service on Yom Kippur, which is a service which is the most overwhelming day of mercy of the year. This is the Ramban. I'm just adding the idea about the hair and Esav being the hairy man. Now, why is Yaakov the only one who could contend with the distortions of Esav? The Gemara tells us that the only antidote to the evil inclination is the study of Torah. There's no other antidote. Barasi Eitzah Barasi Lo Torah Tavlin. The only antidote is the Torah itself. Yaakov himself personified Torah. The Torah quantifies it. Who is Yaakov? Yaakov Hishtam Yeshivolim. He's the pure man, perfect man who dwelt in the tent of Torah. Because he was that, therefore, he had the capability, due to his spiritualization through Torah, to see clearly exactly what this man was about, not to be deceived. Now, we read that Yaakov, when he was coming back, he crossed the Yabok River. He was attacked by an angel, and he fought. He fought till dawn with this angel. This angel wanted to kill him. Who was this angel? You know what this angel was? Samach Mem. It was the angel of Esau, who Samach Mem. He wanted to destroy Yaakov, wasn't able to destroy him. He injured him, wasn't able to destroy him. Because Yaakov being a personification of Torah, and Torah being the antidote to what Samach Mem represents, he was able to see the falseness because he had such an absolute understanding of truth, Samach Mem, and because of that, being the victor, he received a new name, Yisrael, because you lorded over man and God, therefore you're another dimension of person. Now you have relevance to be the one to ultimately father the nation that would be worthy of receiving the Torah at Sinai. Now, there's an obvious question. The Gemara asks a question. The Talmud asks the question. What is the most auspicious historical moment of existence? The giving of Torah at Sinai. Every Shavuos we celebrate nationhood. How did we become a Jewish nation? God gave us his Torah. The objective of creation was met at Sinai. Well, we said Nasa v'nishma. You mean said we couldn't find a more auspicious location? The most auspicious moment in a desolate location, a desert. It could have been in the Himalayas, could have been in Hawaii. It's the closest thing to paradise. Lush, green, fruits, bounty. desolate, death, parched. Is that a place that God should come and show his glory to the world in the desert? And the Talmud asked this question. Why the desert? So the Talmud answers, because we had said the water is compared to a number of liquids. One is water. Humility is crucial. To be able to be the repository and have the ability to process Torah, you have to be humble. And the more humble you are, the greater relevance you have to merit, to divine assistance, to be able to come upon the truth of Torah. What is the desert? Nobody's making any claims, land claims. There are no squatters in the desert. You got it. The desert is desolate, ownerless, what we call hefker. A person, when you approach Torah, it's like, I have no identity. I'm available for anybody who wants to study Torah. There's no ego. I'm here. I'm the ignorant nobody. Ezu chacham alomid b'kolodom. David Melch says, who's the wise man? The one who's able to learn from anybody. David says, Mikom olam de'iskalti. From all those who can teach me, I'm ready to study. But you have to have that special level of humility. You have to be hefker. Anybody who wants to study from me, whether he's that or this, if he has an interest in study, I'm available to accommodate him. That's why God chose the desert to be the location in which the Torah was communicated to Jewish people. But I was thinking differently. In addition, what is the desert? The desert is the location of Samach Mem. That's his stronghold. All the nether forces. God gives the Torah there. You know what God is saying? Public statement. Barasi Yitzhara, Barasi Torah Tavlin. There's no more intense negative force, contrary to holiness and goodness, than that desert. That's the stronghold. And that's where the Torah is going to be given. Because the only antidote to that, despite that, is the Torah itself. That's why God chose the desert, for that reason. The Mesilas Yesharim, Rabbi Luzzatto writes in Path of the Just, the person says, you know something, I'll put on tefillin, I'll pray all day. That'll protect me from the evil inclination. It's like a doctor who's an expert in oncology says, you have to undergo this protocol to be able to conquer and destroy that cancer. It says, well, why can't I eat bananas and take Bayer aspirin every morning with an Alka-Seltzer? Why isn't that enough? Because he says, because if you understand the nature of this disease, you're not going to survive it. That's the reality. God says, I created that force. The only thing that's able to strip it of its and to nullify it is only the Torah itself. I've created the evil inclination, even the most lethal form of it. The Torah is the Tavlin. That's the antidote. There's nothing else that'll do it. And therefore Yaakov was the only one, because he was the personification of Torah, that he was the counterbalance to Esau for that reason. We find something very interesting. Esau comes back from the field, and the Torah tells us he's weary, fatigued. And the Torah first says that Yitzchak loved Esau because he was a hunter and he would feed him, or he trapped him with his mouth. Rivka loved Yaakov because Rivka knew the truth, because Shem told her exactly who Yaakov was and who Esau was. So Rivka, knowing the truth, loved Yaakov. Yaakov now is cooking lentil soup. Why lentil soup? You know, it's not Monday. Monday's lentil soup day. So why was he cooking lentil soup? So the Medrash tells us because Avraham Avinu had passed away. And because a mourner eats items that are round. Lentils are round. So it's the fare of a mourner. So he was cooking it for his father because his father became a mourner. Because Avram passed away. V'yovu Esav min hasodev hu ayef. Torah says Esav comes from the field and he's fatigued. And what does he say? V'yomei Esav el Yaakov The broth, it was a reddish broth, the lentils. He says, give me some of that red stuff. Because I'm just exhausted. I'm fatigued. Because he was so earthy and so overwhelmingly wanted to have that soup, he couldn't even say lentil soup. He says, give me that red stuff. And he didn't even say, feed me. He says, haliteni. How do you feed a camel? Just pour it down its throat. Just pour it down my throat. It's a level of gluttonous, which it tells us, speaks volumes of where he was at. That's how earthy he was. Okay? Yaakov, immediately. He says, not a problem. No, we'll make a deal. You want the red stuff? You sell me your birthright. He says, I'm immortal. I'm going to die. What do I need it for? And he says, I want you to swear, take an oath that this is unconditional sale. And it says that he sold his birthright. And he gave him bread and lentil soup for the birthright. Again, this is the Nobel laureate writing the financial document. They say, these Jews, they're always so underhanded. He caught Esav in a weak moment and was like take candy from a baby. The Jews, underhanded, always conniving. You can't trust these Jews. Yeah, that's if you read it when you have about a 20 IQ. That's the takeaway. But if you have an Einstein IQ and you read it with the proper understanding, you understand it says something totally different than that. Why did Yaakov want the birthright? What is the birthright? Now we know only the Kohen is qualified to officiate in the Mishkan or the temple. Before the Jews sinned with the golden calf, who was the officiant of God? The Bechor, the firstborn. Esav, birthright, its value was to have that special relation with God. So Esav said, Ein Rosh Zekadai Yakriv or Yikorav LaKodesh Baruch Hu. Now, when it said he was fatigued, he had committed that day 5 cardinal sins. You hear this? He raped a married woman. He committed murder. He did idolatry, blasphemy, and heresy, all on the same day. And at the end, he displays his earthiness, a level of gluttonous, which is unheard of. They called him the red one because of this incident with give me that red stuff, because he couldn't say lentil soup. So Yaakov says, this man should be God's officiant. It's a disgrace to God. There's no way, whatever way I could take that birthright from him. So it's not I want the birthright for me. Not for him at all. This is to avert God being disgraced, that this man should be God's officiant. So it's not Yaakov wants it for himself. He does this. Him having it is disastrous. Could you imagine? A person has a thriving business. It's on the whatever, the Dow, right? It's an indicator. He has 2 sons. His firstborn has an 80 IQ, elementary school dropout. The second son graduated Wharton and Harvard Business School. So the second son realizes if this 80 IQ son runs the company, it'll take about 1 day, the company's over. They're closing the doors. This son, he's interested in his brother. If there's gonna be any inheritance, I better run the company. So he does whatever he can to take it away from him and gets it written over to him because he should run the company, although he's not the firstborn. It'll be disastrous. Yaakov says, this man, he should be the officiant of God, to be the Kohen. This man's such a Rasha, I will not allow him even go near that. So why did he take it? Not that he wanted to connive him. He caught him he was in a weak moment, therefore he took it. But why did he take it? Because he wanted it for himself? Definitely not. But it just showed you he didn't value it. That he sold it for a pot of soup, even though it was a weak moment. How did he do it? And the Torah says, Vayivez Esau, he disgraced it. That he chose the lentil soup for the birthright, it was a disgrace. Who would consider such a thing? It's like a person says, give me lentil soup, and then you could blow my brains out. Then you could kill me. Because I'm starving. You mean I'm going to give my life for a bowl of lentil soup or a pot of lentil soup? Of course not. You value your life more than the moment satisfaction of satisfying your hunger. How do you give away everything for as hungry as you are? The answer is that tells us who you are. It's disgraceful that you should be that person to be God's Kohen. That's who Yaakov is. So how do people, the person who has no relevance to appreciate what spirituality is and what Yaakov is? If God says, Elokei Yaakov, I am the God of Yaakov, and Yaakov is called the chosen of the patriarchs, could Yaakov be the conniving guy? The underhanded, the charlatan? And not only that, when he goes to Lavan, who's the expert in this, he outsmarts the expert. He goes and flees under the cover of night, and when Lavan, who's the closest thing to Esau, finds out that he was duped at his own game, he's ready to kill Yaakov. You know, here I'm priding myself. I am the ultimate, and you made me look like a peon. In my own game, you beat my own game. Could you imagine? The person's a gambler, and every table he sweeps everything. This little guy comes in, looks like a nobody. And meantime, he has all this money he's been accumulating for years, all his wins of all the gambling. And this little guy comes and win in this moment, takes it all. This little nobody, without a reputation, he should strip me of everything. He's livid. He wants to kill the other one. Lavan wanted to kill Yaakov. He duped him at his own game. Because Yaakov, why did he leave? Why did he survive? Everything he did was based on divine direction. God said, it's time to leave out. Immediately packed his bags, his flocks, he left. We find when Lavan pursued him, he didn't prepare. He wasn't concerned of being attacked. You know why? Because God said, leave. No problem. But what about Lavan pursuing me? I have to worry about Lavan pursuing. God says, leave. He's going to take care of it for me. I don't have to worry. When Avram went to battle against the four kings, did he worry? He knew he'd be the victor. He knew he had the ability to defeat him. Because whatever he did for the sake of God. Now, we find the famous blessing that Yitzchak had given Yaakov, believing it was Esau. And this is V'yitin l'cho Elokim. Vitala Shemayim Mishmani Or. It's God, Elokim, should give you from the dew of heaven and from the fatness of the earth. That was the blessing he had given him. So over there, immediately, the Midrash asked the question. We know Elokim is the attribute of justice. Right now, Yitzchak believes that this is Esau. And Rashi says, why Elokim? Bedin. Im roi loch yitin loch. If you're worthy, you'll get it. Im lav lo yitin loch. And if you're not worthy, you're not getting it. That's justice. Avol le'esov. Oma bishmani yoretz yeh moshevecha. He says, no. When he gave the blessing afterwards to Esau, when he realized that was Yaakov received the blessing, he says, you will have the fat of the land regardless. Whether you deserve, bein tzaddik, bein rasha. Okay, so the question is, right now, Yitzchak believes that this is Yaakov. This is Esau. He says, if that's the case, why did he say Elokim? If he knows it's Yaakov being that special person, he says, if you're tzaddik, yes, if not, not. But Esau later, he says, no, regardless, whatever you are, you're always going to get it. Because you don't get it, because you don't understand it. But at this moment, this is being aware that the one who's receiving the blessing is not Esau. He believes this is Esau. So how do we understand it? Now, there's a famous word from the Sepharno. If Yitzchak knew that Esav was more special, because he's a man dedicated his life to Torah, and Esav was a hunter, what even consider giving the blessing to Esav? It's obvious who deserves the blessing. So he explains, of course he knew Yaakov was the more spiritual, but he believed that Esav, being the man of the world, being the man of material, he would be the Zvulun and Yaakov would be the Yisachar. It'll be a partnership. Yaakov will be dedicated to spirituality, and he'll provide the material needs for Yaakov to be that special Yaakov, that he shouldn't be distracted, because he didn't appreciate, understand how evil Esav was. So Esav's value is Yaakov. That's Esav's value. He's the provider. Okay? So if he's the provider for Yaakov, so what is the objective of Esav? Succeeding. Only if Yaakov is a proper Yaakov. So at this moment, Yitzchak believing that Esav's going to be the Zvulun, therefore it's Elokim. If Yaakov is going to be the tzaddik, then you will have the blessing. Because your success is only to support the Yaakov. Because he is the Yisachar. But if Yisachar is not going to be who he's supposed to be, he's not going to be the tzaddik. If that's the case, you're not going to have the blessing. Because your blessing is contingent on who you're providing for. That's at this moment. Once Yaakov receives the blessing, Yitzchak understands Esav is not supposed to be the provider, because God wouldn't have allowed this to happen. And he became aware that he purchased the birthright. So now he understands Esav is Esav. He may not know he's evil, but he knows he's not meant to be the provider. There's no linkage between him and Yaakov. Now, when he gives him the blessing, it's not contingent on anything. Whatever you are, you will have the material. You have no connection to the spiritual realm at all. Therefore, you will be deserving of the material, whether you toe the line or you don't toe the line. You will receive from the fat of the earth, and that's the difference between before and afterwards. Okay, we're going to stop here. There's more to talk about. There's just not enough time. Everybody be well and have a good day.
Rabbi, thank you.
Rabbi. Wow. Thanks, Rabbi.
Take care.
You too.
Take care, Rabbi. See you in the morning.
Take care.